types of music when you were a young boy?
Well, they used to take me, there was these two theaters. I was born in Cincinnati. I moved to Florida at a very early age, so I grew up down there. But when I was very small, our parents used to go to the Albert Theater or the Schubert Theater in Cincinnati, where they had stage shows every week. And the stage show would be something like Blackstone the Magician and the Count Basie Orchestra. And so I was listening to that, and I was also, they were always playing Fats Waller and Basie records in the house, so I was hearing jazz at a very early age. And my dad was playing in a couple of bands. He was a bass player back then. And so I was influenced by them in that regard.
Did you, and how deeply, what kind of faith were you raised? I mean, your mom played organ in the church. What kind of church was that?
The Catholic Church. I was raised Catholic. I later became a Baha'i. I went from Catholic to atheist, then to Baha'i.
You went from believing to not, then to, believing again. I wanted to, it's important, Mike, to point out that a lot of people may not be aware of this, but there was a bit of mysticism and history that took place early in your playing career, in that you were involved in the first desegregated concert in the history of Florida. And
at least Fort Lauderdale. I don't know about the rest of Florida, but
yeah, exactly. I wanted you
progressive, so the rest of Florida was like, it couldn't have been ahead of Fort Lauderdale.
Definitely. Can you take us through how that came about and why that was such a significant situation?
What happened was in Fort Lauderdale there had been a teenage drinking problem. Our kids were getting killed in automobile accidents and illegal drinking and that, and so they started these teenage nightclubs. I remember one was called the Spider's Nest right on the beach, and so they at that time a form of jazz was popular with the kids. What we now know as R&B, but it was R&B that was sort of laced with jazz. And so they'd have bands play, live bands, and it would look just like a nightclub, only they would serve soft drinks. And so I got a call. There was a disc jockey down there, Leonce Pico. He had a jazz show on from midnight to 6 a.m. I used to get bad grades in school because I'd be listening to him all night, and then I'd fall asleep in class. And so Leonce called me and wanted me to play a jam session in Hollywood, Florida, at the youth center. So he said, "Would you mind playing with a Negro?" Quote. I said, "No, man, I don't mind playing with anybody." Anyway, the quote Negro turned out to be Cannonball.
Unbelievable.
So at that time, he was a band director in the school. I was in the 10th grade in my school. But where I first encountered him was they had the African American church there. Because back then, Fort Lauderdale was like a burg. It wasn't like the metropolis it is now. And so there was this one black church, and the lady that played the piano in the church died. And so Cannonball called my band director and said, "You got anybody over there that could play this kind of music?" He said, "Well, we got this kid that sort of has a leaning in that direction." And so I started out playing in that church. And but the jam session where I first met Cannonball face-to-face was at that jam session, and it was like my jaw hit the floor. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, So I told my dad, and so my dad said, "Well, hire him for the gig." We had a gig playing a street dance. They were dedicating an area of Fort Lauderdale called the Gateway Shopping Center. It's still there now, but they were just breaking the ground, and they were dedicating it. And so they had a street dance. They had a stage built right in the middle of the street. And I remember as soon as Cannonball walked up on the stage, the crowd went hush, because they'd never seen a mixed band. And so he started playing Star Spell on Alabama, and it just melted everybody, man. Everybody started dancing. The big moon was out and everything. So my dad started using him on club dates, and so which was great for him because he was like making about $70 a week as a teacher, and some of the gigs paid $75, And so Cannonball got me this gig with an R&B band. It wasn't his band. He was just a sideman. It was called the Harold Ferguson Band.
Can I just want to go back to something that I was trying to figure out earlier, is that originally you said that there was Cannonball's church, or there was an African-American church that was looking for a piano player, and they wanted you to actually come in and play that, but it was, at the time, it was totally, it was unprecedented to have, white kid going into a black church. Yeah,
very much so.
So I mean, but it went down. And,
Yeah.
and when you went in there, talk about what it was. It was all head games. It was all hype. It wasn't really what perception. It was. Talk about the reality of going into that church and being loved immediately and accepted.
Well, the first thing I remember was the guy handed me a hymn book, and they had chorale-like type piano parts to the hymns they were singing. So I just read it like it was in the book. He said, "No, jazz it up a little bit." So I started just playing around with the rhythm, and then they fell in love with me, and so I became the pianist in the church. And so that's how that went down. I hadn't met Cannonball. He's the one that got me the gig, but I hadn't met him personally. I just met the preacher in the church, in the congregants. And
Did you? Was there any way, like after the that first street jam, where your father, like, were you aware at all that something magical had actually taken place? The idea that there was a full moon overhead, the place was lit up by the moon, and then you have Cannonball singing, playing.
Star Song about Alabama. I remember distinctly. Man, he played it so beautifully, like it put a rapture over everybody.
See, what I want my audience to realize is this is Mike Longo is a classic example of a man who honed his craft, but also, Mike, as we go through this interview, I think people are going to realize that a lot of life is timing. And I have a question for you about timing. Do you think you just have to, in your mind, through your life, did you have to wait for the right time, or did you create the circumstances in which the timing then created the magic?
Well, like that, when I met Cannonball, that was it was an accident, but sometimes things are predestined, if you know what I mean.
Can you talk a little bit more about predestination?
Well, for example, I used to stay up all night listening to the radio and listening to jazz. And this one night, Dizzy came on, and I was like in a twilight, half asleep, half awake, and I heard him play a note a certain way, and something said, "That's very significant. Remember that." Then I had this weird dream, man, where these two guys in business suits were talking to me all night about the way my life was going to go down in terms of doing something about racism and the kind of music I was going to play. And then the next day, I woke up and I said, "Oh man, what a weird dream!" Because it wasn't really like a dream; it was more like a visit. And so I happened to be walking by the piano on my way to school, and I was looking at it, and I remembered that sound, and I played it on the piano. And next thing I know, man, everything changed. Like the way I was seeing things, the grass looked greener, the trees looked greener, and when I got to school, everybody looked different. And that night, this drummer I knew in school, we were at the YMCA right across from the school, and there was a piano there. And he had set up his drum. He said, "Come on, let's play something, man." And I started playing. All of a sudden, I could play like, I sound like Errol Garner or something, man. There was a big crowd gathered around us, and that was sort of like my career started at that point. Then years later, Dizzy hired me, and so it was sort of predestined.
It's beautiful. I kind of I feel the same way a little bit on my trajectory as well. But don't you feel, or how do you feel about growth spurts? A person, I think there's a lot of pressure in our society now, whether it's in music or just in anything, to have things, somehow you need to have things figured out at a young age. And if you don't, then somehow you're behind the curve. We're in this competitive world. We're competing all the time. And if you don't have things figured out, somehow you're lesser than. And in my case, I just think it's irrational and ridiculous, because I'm 33 and I feel like I'm like a phoenix rising from the ashes at this time in my life. Did you have different growth spurts at different periods of time in your life, and are you still growing today?
Yes. I just finished a new CD. I just finished the mastering now. We recorded 2 weeks ago Monday. Right after the record date, I had this big breakthrough, and I said, "Oh man, I wish I had known that before." But that's always been that way. As soon as I record something, then I'll have a musical breakthrough, and I'm already ready to record the next one.
That's great, though. That's great.
But I got to tell you, when I was 3 years old, my family, we had a Christmas party at one of the relatives' house, and I remember sitting behind a piano and looking at it, and something in me said, "I can play this thing." And I hadn't even touched the piano, but I knew I could play it. I was just looking at the keyboard and said, I can play this thing.
What do you think appealed to you on like a multi-sensory level? Because it wasn't like you had any Was it just the way it was set up? I mean, did the keys make sense? How could you put that in some kind of? How can you articulate that?
I started touching the piano and it started to sound like music, as opposed to the way some kids bang on a piano. I didn't do that. I was touching the notes, and the black notes on the piano are basically a pentatonic scale, like an African thing. And I started playing the black notes, and I was starting to sound like music. So I would play it, and then that's why my parents, they took me to the conservatory in Cincinnati, and I started studying with the teacher there because I could make music. That's all I can say. I guess it sounded like music.
When do you? And so you felt at first like you went to the conservatory and you were getting some sort of. Was it a classical upbringing? How were you being taught? And then how did you, early on, how did you extrapolate off of that to develop an original sound?
Well, they were starting me out like with beginners books, but yeah, it was classical music. But there was a lady named Catherine Rank that played in the pit in one of those theaters I was telling you about, and my father knew her, and she started teaching me boogie woogie. And so I started being able to play boogie woogie. I found she showed me a left-hand stride thing, and then I started putting stuff against it with my right hand. And that's why they took me to the conservatory, because I was starting to play music. And so then later on, when I was 12 in Florida, I won a boogie woogie contest. And that really was where my career started with that.
Boogie woogie is, how can you just talk about the type of bands that were doing it at that time? I mean, was it blues? Was it up tempo shuffle? How does that?
Yeah, it was blues, but you went doonga 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 like that, or boom boom ba doo ba doo boo doo ba doo ba doo boo ba doo ba doo ba doo. The thing was, I could swing. There was two kinds of boogie woogie. One of them evolved into rock and roll. The other one was evolved into jazz eventually, but the rock and roll was like straight eighth notes. Run, ding, 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 ding. I wasn't attracted to that. I was more attracted to the doonga 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 doonga.
Yeah. The rubber band style back. The elastic funk stuff.
Yeah.
So you hit the Chitlin circuit. I was hoping, to this day, I still love when I met you in New York and you told me about that plywood, the vulnerable plywood where you guys were bouncing off that stuff, but that was with an R&B group. Is that right?
Yeah, but Cannonball was on the group. He got me the gig. It was a Howard Ferguson band. But they, the Chitlin circuit, they would have the band, and they had a blues singer. I remember the blues singer was this crippled guy on crutches, but he could sing, man. This cat could sing, man. And they had the shake dancers and the comedian and the band. We'd be playing in the bandstand. I would be sitting over at the piano and I'd be rocking. The bandstand would be pulsating with the beat, and it was plywood, so I was bouncing up and down. And I can remember that feeling, man. It was like, wow. And then the whole dance floor would be packed with people dancing in the same pulse that I was rocking up and down with. So it was like, oh man, you feel like you died and went to heaven.
Oh, and how long did you do that for?
Well, I was in the 10th grade when I met Cannonball, so it was that year. And when I was in the 11th grade, he went to New York and got discovered, I guess you'd say, and the rest was history. Next time I saw Cannonball, I was already with Dizzy playing at the Longo Jazz Festival in Baltimore.
So hold on, how many years? I just want to be clear. The next time you saw Cannonball was what year?
Well, I went with Dizzy at the end of '66, and so this had to be around '67, maybe '68.
And when you saw Cannon at that point, I mean, did you pick up right where you left off? Were you able to talk about? I mean, so much had happened, but in fact, so little time had actually passed at the same time.
I just remember him hugging me and saying, "I'm so proud of your behind." There's a story I should tell you, because he loved my father. Because my father, we moved out to this part of Florida called Plantation, Florida. At that time, it was underdeveloped. Like, we were one of the first families to move out there, and there was a Plantation Country Club. And so my father was a member of the country club, but he had a wholesale produce business, and he serviced them with their produce. So they knew my father had a band, so they hired his band. So we showed up with Cannonball. So after the first set, the maitre d' comes and said, "We got a table over here for the band to eat." So we all went and sat down. So about 2 minutes later, he comes over and he said, "We've had some complaints about the colored boy." He meant Cannonball.
Mm.
So he's going to have to eat in the kitchen. So my dad got pissed off, and he threw his napkin in. "Come on, we'll all go in the kitchen."
Right.
And so the band got up, and as we were walking, he turned around, and he said, "You take my membership and shove it up here, you know what?"
Wow.
And so from that point on, my Cannonball, he loved my father, man. And I must have played another dozen gigs with him after that. And he came by when my father had this new warehouse. He had a party, and Cannonball came by and played. Then he got me that gig with the R&B band. And so when we played Laurel, Maryland with Dizzy, my parents happened to come up, and they were at the gig, and Cannonball was falling over. He hadn't seen my dad since back then, you know. And so I remember he embraced with my father and my mother and everything. And
it was like your father drew a line in the sand, basically saying, "I'm not going to stand for this crap." There's something called social justice, and I'm just trying to figure out that, you know, I guess what I'm trying to say is, why, Mike, in your mind, why was it so hard for white people to accept black people when you were growing up? In your mind, I mean, obviously there's a lot of history, but even when you were a kid, what could you say? Were there just a lot of people that were sticking their head in the sand? They knew it was wrong? Or there was just a lot of deep-seated hatred through misunderstanding? How can you rationalize that?
I have a theory about it. My theory is that people project onto a race or a group of people the thing that they hate about themselves. The part of themselves that they hate, they project onto a race and then hate that race because it represents what they hate about themselves. So it's basically a self-loathing kind of thing. And so I grew up in the South, and man, when I was around racist type people, I could always see, like, this guy's a weakling. This guy's a weakling.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't have any intelligence, and he's weak. A weak person. And so they would project that onto people, other people. And that's what my theory is anyway. That's what, to me, that's the underlying situation with racists.
Right. So, and I tend to actually, I think that's very well articulated, because it's kind of like the idea of saying, okay, I have these shortcomings and I'm very insecure about them, and the only way I'm going to feel better about myself is by projecting that or putting it on somebody else of a different color. And then
hating them for that, the same way you hate yourself.
What do you say? Yeah, I mean, when you go around, you grew up, and we're going to chronicle it heavily in the second hour, but all your bands were mixed, and the guys that you played with were black, white, Indian, Baha'i, Christian, Jewish. It was just such a melting pot, and it's one of the things that I am really searching for in that your generation of players from the late 60s and early 70s. What created, sort of, at least in music, what created that tolerance or that ability to say difference is good, multi-ethnic is good, different types of music on bills is good? That to me was inclusive, whereas now we're living in something very different from that. Why was it like that at that time?
The simple answer I would come up with is reality. Okay, that's reality. And so musicians have always been, especially jazz musicians, in tune with reality. And so everything else is a mirage. I mean, that's BS, you know. And so the truth is we're all branches of one tree and leaves of one branch and fruit thereof. And so the oneness of all people is a reality that musicians have seemed to have always been in tune with, especially jazz. I mean, that's, you know, the first interracial marriages were jazz musicians, and it's just like being able to perceive the truth or perceive reality.
Talking with Mike Longo. Mike, we got about a minute and a half before we take a hard break at the bottom of the hour, and I have to ask you a question. Did you like to box a lot? Were you a boxer?
In high school, yeah.
You know, it's
I've
funny.
always been a boxing fan.
You know, because Mike, I'll tell you, and I listened intently. All I listened to was Mike Longo compositions today, gearing up for this, kind of like a boxing fight. But some of when I hear the grooves and the ducking and the swaying and the moving, some of those themes that we talked about, that germ, it sounds like it feels like a boxing match.
Oh yeah.
You know, and what I really want to do when we come back is something we haven't really done before, but I know it's going to work well with Mike, is to play through a piece of your music and talk about the evolution of it and the diversity of it and how it came to being, because it's some of the more complex stuff, some of the more complex compositions that I've really ever heard. So, Mike, it's so good to talk to you, man. I hope you and your wife are doing great and the family's doing well. And just sit tight, and we'll come back on the bottom half and do it all over again.
All right, sir.
All right now.
CNN Radio, I'm Jim Ribble. The Libyan rebels say they've taken the civil war inside Tripoli, which is Muammar Gaddafi's stronghold, but a Libyan government spokesman says Gaddafi's still in control. CNN's Matthew Chance in Tripoli says the situation is confusing.
It's not clear to us, I have to say, what exactly these clashes are all about, whether this is any kind of rebel advance or whether this is some sort of uprising which is taking place inside Tripoli.
Despite the Syrian regime saying its military operations against civilian protesters had ended, we're getting reports of violence in the city of Homs today. Witnesses report tanks rolling into the city. A local official in Pakistan says the death toll's up to 51 after yesterday's suicide bombing at a crowded Pakistani mosque. A charter Boeing 737-200 crashed in Canada's Arctic near Resolute Bay today. 12 people reported dead, 3 survivors. The cause is not known. And officials say at least 18 people were killed and 20 injured when a bus skidded off a road in the mountains of Kashmir. The most trusted name in news. This is CNN Radio.
I'm in the I need cordless cutting shears to finish this vent work business.
At Grainger, we know what business you're in.
I'm in the if you can help my business, then you'll get my business.
The business of getting things done. That's why we offer over 900,000 products and the support you need to get your job done right and on time. Call, click Grainger.com or stop by one of our branches. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Live from Progressive.
Next caller.
Hey, Flo, so what's up with the Snapshot discount?
It rewards your good driving habits, and it's our biggest discount ever.
Bigger than the safe driver discount?
Bigger.
Homeowners discount?
Bigger.
The phenomenally humongo discount?
If it existed, yeah.
Wow, that is big.
The Snapshot discount. It's new, it's a big deal, and it's finally here. Learn more at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and its affiliates. Mayfield Village, Ohio. Prices vary based on how you buy. Snapshot is not available in all states.
Folks, this is Jake Feinberg. One of the first things I wanted to do when I moved to Tucson was find authentic Chinese cuisine. After a tip from the Chinese Student Association, I headed over to Badar Chinese Restaurant. Well, it's been 7 years, and I have never looked back. Located at 7321 East Broadway Boulevard, Badar has been a family-run operation since 1992. The award-winning chef produces succulent dishes from sizzling ginger chicken to salt and pepper shrimp. The thing that separates Badar from the rest is that the chef procures ancient oriental dishes with the exotic island flair of Taiwan. Most importantly, there are no gimmicks or razzle-dazzle at Badar. You won't find any flat-screen TVs or karaoke machines. Badar is a place to go enjoy good food and spend time with your family. It exudes peace and tranquility after a long week of work. So come down and check out Badar Chinese Restaurant. Hong Hao Chu. It's that good. Folks, this is Jake Feinberg. Being a father, I know there is nothing more important than your child's health. And nobody is more dedicated to children's health in Southern Arizona than Dwayne Dyson. Dr. Dyson is Tucson's finest pediatrician and has devoted much of his professional career to improving the lives of children. Located at 4530 East Camp Fort Lowell, Dr. Dyson's resume speaks for itself. After doing his undergraduate work at Cal Berkeley, his schooling took him to Morehouse School of Medicine, where he mentored young adolescents about the need for pediatric physicians in Atlanta, and worked extensively with infants at the Texas Children's Hospital. The special thing about Dr. Dyson is that while his in-house care is exceptional, he also prepares families about what to expect once they leave the office. Dr. Dyson provides comprehensive and honest analysis for all of his patients. Dr. Dyson and his family live and work in Tucson because he knows how vibrant and diverse the community is. He is committed to procuring a robust family health center that can instill trust and alleviate the concerns of parents. Like I said, his resume speaks for itself. For more information, check out DysonPediatrics.com. Folks, this is Jake Feinberg. As a passionate consumer of vinyl records, I value the art of collecting and archiving. So I have marked my calendar for Sunday, November 6th for the 7th Annual Tucson Record Show, located at Las Casulitas Event Center at I-10 and Grant. The show features vinyl collectors and dealers from all over the state. Doors open at 9 a.m. and tables are available for rent, but space is running out fast. For more information, contact Bruce Smith at 622-0104. The 7th Annual Tucson Record Show, 1365 West Grant and I-10, Sunday, November 7th. It's time to dig and get dirty. Don't miss it. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Be a part of a new coalition with Jake Feinberg. The second half of my show starts right now. Welcome back, everybody. And we have no time to waste. Joined here by Mike Longo, great pianist, even better individual and human being. Mike, thanks so much for being part of the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
Mike, I don't want to gloss over this because I will fly to Western Kentucky someday and take a picture of you. You're in the Western Kentucky Hall of Fame.
Yeah, right.
All right, now
the Wall of Fame.
The Wall of Fame, but aside from a couple of maybe some punt returners, I don't think there's anyone cooler that ever went to Western Kentucky than Mike Longo. So Mike, listen, I remember talking to you about this in person, and it really had an effect on me. But when you went, you had a chance to, you played in New York for a while, and then you had a chance to study at Oscar Peterson's conservatory up in Toronto.
Correct.
And I can't recall the guy's name, but there was an individual, a teacher up there who totally opened your mind, opened your skull about composition. And I was hoping that you could talk about that man, whose name escapes me now.
Phil Nimmons.
Say it again?
Phil Nimmons.
Talk about him and what he did that made you look at composition and musical structure differently.
The first thing he had me do was, he said, go home and write me 5 melodies. He said, write me 2 4-bar phrases, a 5-bar phrase, a 7-bar phrase, and an 11-bar phrase, or something like that. And I was up all night trying to come up with these phrases, but as a result of doing that work, it put me in touch with an inner voice that I can say now is the essence of true original musical composition, that inner voice. And so by giving me an assignment, the purpose of the assignment, because he knew I had to struggle with the 5-bar phrases and 7-bar phrases, the purpose of it was for me to search myself until I found that voice, and that's really what took place. And I realized it wasn't about writing the phrase, it was about finding that voice.
When you say a voice, there was people speaking words to you, or
no. Stravinsky once said the musical intuition is perfect. If the music's not perfect, it didn't come from there.
Mm-hmm.
So the place where music comes from revealed music rather than. So when Stravinsky composed, he didn't really compose as much as he revealed the music with it. And so Simon and Phil Nimmons put me in that place. Put me in touch with that place. I hadn't even known it existed before that.
When you came back to see him the next day, how did those compositions work out for you?
Well, he seemed to be impressed with the melodies I wrote. And it was like melodies that were not constructed at a piano or constructed to fit harmony or anything. It was just pure melody coming from out in space someplace. And so he had this grin on his face like he knew that's what would happen. And so everything proceeded from there.
Well, that's perfect. We've been able to clear up some of the technical glitches over here at KJLL and any of those rolling thunderstorms through the Peekskill Mountains right now. But so Mike, you were playing. You got up to New York after Western Kentucky, and how did you immerse yourself? How did you feel comfortable in the scene up there? Did you get a day job while you were trying to get into the music scene, or how did that all
No,
work?
I didn't have to. When I came in, see, when I left Bowling Green, Kentucky, a band, a guy that had known me called me and said this band, it was a traditional band playing Dixieland, actually, needed a piano player. And so I walked across the stage, got my degree, got in a car, and went to Buffalo, New York, and started playing the next night with this band. And they were traveling. They traveled for 2 years, and they got booked into the Metropole Cafe in New York. I don't know if you know about that place, but they had 5 bands a day working there, jazz band. During the day, they would have like 2 bands that would be like Tony Parenti or Coleman Hawkins and Gene Krupa, those kind of bands. Then at night, Henry Red Allen and Saul Yeager would be the bands, behind the bar downstairs, and then upstairs, somebody like Dizzy or Miles would be playing. And so when that band left, I just stayed at the Metropole. They hired me. And so they had 5 house pianists, and I was like a 20-year-old, you know. But I was, I remember Claude Hawkins, the stride pianist. Dick Wellstead was one. Sammy Price, the boogie piano player, and Marty Napoleon. And so I remember the first night I played there, I looked down, we were playing the first set, and Marty Napoleon and all the piano players in the neighborhood were listening to us. And Marty went, "You got to come hear this kid play the piano. You got to come hear this kid play the piano." And so I looked down, and they were all standing there at the bar. It was packed. The place was 3 deep at the bar. It was like, and so like all of a sudden I said, "Man, New York is where it's at, man." And so that's when the bug bit me. And I stayed in New York. I became a New Yorker.
And the story goes that you were playing at the Metropole, like you said, you were downstairs, or Dizzy was upstairs, and
yeah.
he wound up he was playing one night. He walked out and he heard you. You know, it was in his ear, and
yeah.
and he made an offhand comment to a magazine, saying, someone said, are there any new up and comers, young whippersnappers? And he's like, yeah, there's this Michael Longo character on piano, and but in fact, you guys had never met before.
No. A bass player in Florida called me up and said, "Man, did you see the international musician?" I said, "Why?" He said, "Dizzy Gillespie's talking about you." And I had no idea, And 2 years later, I left there and went to Toronto to study with Oscar. When I came back to New York, I had a manager by the name of Milt Gray. He used to manage Buddy DeFranco, and he sort of like took me under his wing, and he was booking me. I was the house trio at the Basin Street East, and then the Embers on the east side. And Dizzy came in with his quintet. He was the headliner, and my trio would play in between the sets. We were the intermission. And I was playing my set one night, and Dizzy was sitting in the audience with some guests, and I looked down, and he looked up at me and mouthed the words, "I love you." Later on, he produced a record on me at Pablo, and he said that was when he knew he wanted me on his group, on that gig. And then I was playing the Embers West on the other side of town a couple of years later. I had a trio with Paul Chambers and Chuck Lampkin, and Roy Eldridge went around the corner and told Dizzy, "You got to come hear this piano player." And Dizzy came over, and I didn't know he was there. He was sitting ringside. And so when we got off the stand, he said, "I'm going to call you tomorrow." And he called me. He said, "Meet me at the Union. I got something I want to talk to you about." So I went down to the Union. He said, "When I get back from Europe, I'm going to need a pianist." He didn't even get the words. I said, you got one. I didn't even ask him how much I was getting, how much money I was going to get. Yeah.
It didn't, at that point, I just want to clarify something. He produced that album for Pablo, Talk with the Spirits?
Yes.
So, but I was under the impression that you had started collaborating with him before that. You and him were working before that time?
Oh yeah.
So
I was already on his group. I had been on his group for several years.
Exactly, and
that was 76.
Exactly, and then you started with him in 63.
67.
67.
66. End of 66. December 11, 1966.
And take us through a little bit about that band that you started with, and if the bug had already bit you, you were fully infected after that.
The first Dizzy band I was with was Candy Finch on drums, Moody on saxophone, Dizzy, and Frank Schifano was the bassist. And I remember the first night, I was so inspired by Dizzy. I remember even sight reading. He wrote this piece for piano called Just a Thought. He was like, I guess he was challenging me or something. And I sight read it and I played it very well, I guess. Dizzy was saying, hell yeah, hell yeah. Then the next night I fell on my butt because I didn't realize you had to know something because you can't just go on inspiration. You're not going to be inspired every night. And I've noticed that Dizzy and Moody were playing on that high level. Every time I pick up the horn, I say, oh, man, I need to learn some stuff because I can't be just hoping I'm inspired.
It's so true because, I can come in with a boatload of energy to an interview, but if I'm not prepared for it, you can't do it on juice alone.
That's right.
You got to be able. You got to have your chops.
That's right. Yeah.
Mike,
then I went through a long period of developing those chops.
I don't want to. I want to take it chronologically here, but I wanted to ask you, was there a period of time where maybe it was in consultation with Diz, or was there a certain time where you just knew at that point your time had come to be a leader? Did someone reach out to you and say, Mike, it's time, or how did that work?
Well, actually, there was a period there where in the 70s where Dizzy was doing a lot of these all-star tours, like where he'd just go on by his own and lead the group in New York. And I had copped a gig on the East Side at a place called the Lost and Found, a duo gig. I stayed there for a year and a half. And when Dizzy would get a gig, I would just put a sub in and go out and play Dizzy gig and then come back. But during that period, that was before I had recorded on my own. The first record I made was over at Mainstream, a record called Matrix. But during that time, I started to develop what you might call an identity as a soul, like the piano is the leader in the group. So I started developing what people now know as a Mike Longo style, if you want to call it that, or my own identity. And so when I'd go back to play with Dizzy, I'd be having to subdue that because your job when you play with Dizzy is to support Dizzy's playing, and so I had to suppress that identity and go into the bag of being the sideman with Dizzy, I started to feel a little resentful. And I said, it's time to leave because I don't ever want to have any kind of disunity with Dizzy because we had a totally 100% harmonious relationship, always. Mm-hmm. And so as soon as I started feeling like a little bit resentful because I had to suppress my identity, I said, it's time to split, man, and go out on my own. I'm just going to cut to the chase. For my audience out there, easily one of the top 5 greatest jazz albums of all time is The Awakening. It was Mike Longo was the leader on that album, and his identity might have been suppressed up to that point, but you brought along so many classic cats just to see. First of all, the energy on that session is unfathomable. It is one of the highest, most peaked, tripped out albums I've ever heard in my life. I'm not sure. What I want to do, Mike, is play a track, and then listen to it for a little while. Come back and we can talk about, and you can deconstruct it for us. Is that okay? Our phone. The phone went dead. Ours.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, we're good. We're good. We're good, man. I want to apologize. Let's listen to bitching, because I'm bitching a lot right now, okay?
All right.
Hold on. You know, that group is smoking, and I'll tell you, Dizzy's playing with us, man, because the more I try, the harder it gets. We keep having these technical malfunctions, my friend. I'm sorry. You know, the truth is that I mean, the best you can recollect. I mean, talk a little bit about you know, how did Bob Shad, when you guys came in there, did he just give you free reign to bring in who you wanted to bring in, and talk about that session itself?
Yeah, I had signed with him as a pianist, as a piano group, and so he knew I had a reputation for writing for Dizzy. So he called me up and said, "How would you like to do a composer's album?" And so
what is a composer's album?
They write the whole album, all originals.
Right.
And so he said, "I'd like you to do with some horns and guitar with plenty of wah-wah." That's what he, and so I wrote the music, and I told him I want to use 3 horns, and then I just called friends of mine like Moody and Curtis Fuller and Virgil Jones, Ron Carter, Mickey Roker, and Al Gaffa, and then Dizzy. He said, "I'll come in and play conga drums." So he's on there playing congas. And the funny thing was, he listened because at the end of the session, they have you sign a W9 form or whatever it was.
Sure.
So he signed John Gillespie. He got paid scale. You know how much it would cost to hire Dizzy?
Yeah, exactly.
He got paid scale, but they put his name on there from his W9 form. So John Gillespie.
John Gillespie. But let's talk about the undulation of it. Da 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 ba 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 ba. And then there's like, can you talk about we talked about it last time face to face, the germ, how that germ has to marinate, metastasize, however you want to say it. Talk about how that germ develops into something like bitching.
Well, the germ for that was that figure you keep hearing returning, bamp to bamp to bamp to bamp bamp bamp. So I heard that in my head. I could remember the shake dancers from back when I was playing on the Chitlin circuit. They had this move that they'd make where they were like crisscrossing on the stage, like they're almost like running into each other, but they wouldn't. And so I heard that line in my head. We didn't play that back then. But I could see those girls moving like that, and it suggested that line to me. And like what Stravinsky said, the music reveals itself. So that was I could always tell anyway when I had a loaded germ, I'd call it like a germ. It's like a piece of musical energy that is the real thing. It's got the energy in it. And so I sat down at the score pad, and I started writing. I wrote the germ down, and I think. Can I say this on the air?
Do it.
I heard, "God damn it, I know." So do bang, and the
exactly. Yeah, right.
The whole thing just started to unfold, and it's sort of like I can remember Dizzy commissioned me to write a thing for a symphony orchestra, a 3-movement suite for him. I remember sitting down. I wrote for 7 weeks, 7 days a week, from 10 in the morning to 4 a.m. And I'd be so involved in the writing of the music, it would be like 4 o'clock in the morning, I wouldn't know where the time went. And so when I wrote the Awakening album, like the tune Bitchin', it was like that. I started writing, next thing you know, it ended up being what you now know as Bitchin'. So I just let the music go where it wanted to go. It kind of revealed itself. It's like I didn't really write Bitchin' as much as I uncovered it.
Just the way Mickey comes in with the snap and the drums. I'm teaching my daughter how to do handstands to that music. So it's but I want Mike, in our remaining moments here, can you talk a little bit about your jam sessions at the Baha'i Temple, how you can intermesh music and faith and use faith productively to bring people together?
Actually, we don't do any. They gave us that theater on Tuesday nights.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't talk about the faith because I book my band plays about every 5 weeks. I have 3 bands: a funk band, the big band, and my trio. The rest of the time I book other groups. But the Baha'is, you're not allowed to proselytize the faith. So what happens there is everybody loves to play there because there's this vibe.
Mm-hmm. That's really what I was getting at. Yeah.
Yeah, they play so inspired there, and they don't know why. And they keep calling out, "We love playing here. We love playing here," because something hits them, and they start playing like they don't play anyplace else. It's like every time there's a performance there, it's like a high energy, like the heavyweight championship. And they're not sure why that is. I know why it is, but it's the vibe in the place, and we have a huge portrait of Dizzy there, and like Dizzy's there in spirit, causing musicians to play on a level they're not used to playing on. And so that's the only way I can describe it is without trying to push the Baha'i Faith on anybody. They pick it up anyway through the vibe there and their own music.
It's one of the more beautiful religions in the world, and I hope someday that enough common sense people can especially in the Middle East and Iran can get that across to the youth and really allow it to be exercised and used positively.
Yeah, they're persecuting the Baha'is in Iran right now.
I know, and it's unfortunate, but Mike, I can't thank you enough, man. Your music has done so much for me psychologically, and put me on this trajectory. The least I could do was try to continue to highlight your career, and I look forward to collaborating with you in the future and go beyond what we've done in our first 2 sessions. And just all my love to you and your wife, and just enjoy your weekend, my friend.
Thank you, sir.
All right, I'll talk to you soon.
All right, man.
Yeah, this is the Jake Feinberg Show. We'll see you next week.
CBS News, I'm Sam Litzinger. A Libyan government spokesman says, in effect, this is no big deal.